Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Karp with Raymond, and welcome to the Empowered Planning. Today we're going to be talking about operations. And it's probably best to start off. I've just recently read an article from Bain and Company, and this quote came out, and I think it's very germane for what we're talking about today. It said, recovery from COVID-19 will require resilience as companies advance, retreat, adapt, and repeat as necessary. And isn't that true with all the challenges that we've seen over the last 18 months or so? So if we can go to the next slide too, another article I came across from Janet, she was talking about it's our opportunity now to actually fix what wasn't working beforehand as we re-engage into the office. So having said that, what we're going to be covering today is we're going to look on ways that we can improve our performance, better information. Secondly, we'll be working with better information that can lead to better decisions. And then we're going to put a spotlight on technology. We've got our panelists right along the top there, so I'd like to introduce them. First up will be Sandy Schechter, and Sandy's going to talk about the opportunities to improve your performance. Next is Tara. She's going to cover from an accounting solutions perspective, looking at it from a CFO, and that better information can lead to better decisions. And then we'll wrap up with Jim, who's going to be talking in regards to the technology spotlight. So with that as the backdrop, Sandy, why don't you take it from here? Tell us how we can improve our performance.
Thank you, Jim. You know, when I started looking at some of the slides this morning and I said improving performance, well, that's an ominous start to the presentation. And then when I was looking at what you just said in terms of those slides, that, you know, if I can't remember exactly what the quotes were, but it's the repeat process. We are going to continue to look at everything, analyze it, and then repeat. And we're not going to ever be stagnant again. We have to kind of continue to move forward in a different way. And so when I was looking at the improved performance, it's really what all of us are going to talk about. That's really the goal for what this conversation about. I'm going to focus a lot on the back office, the accounting side, how do we get the information, and how does that, you know, when I was thinking about it, does that really improve performance of if you're, you know, making widgets or you're seeing patients or you're serving food, how does that improve the performance? But really what we're going to talk about is that's exactly what you need to improve the performance on the front end. You've got to make sure your back office, your back end is working properly. So what have we seen, you know, when we look at the last 14, 16 months, you know, what have we learned when we've been conducting businesses? And a lot of businesses and people have realized, what do we need to do? What's mandatory to be in person, and what can we switch to virtual? You know, what does it look like? How can we reduce travel? I mean, even this morning, if I was giving this in person, I would have left my house a solid hour before or hour and a half before the presentation would have taken place. Well, this time I went from, you know, my bedroom into my office and I was ready to go. I sat down at my desk and here we are. My commute was, I could say 5 minutes, but probably more like 30 seconds. So that's kind of the difference. So we've saved all that time. Now, would I love to be in person and be able to shake a couple hands, or now it would be a fist bump or maybe an elbow bump, but I would love to be in person and have that opportunity after to talk with people. And we miss that piece. We miss that connection. So please reach out to us personally so we can still have that connection. But the pandemic has also heightened our ability to eliminate some of those manual things. Well, what is that we're looking at? We can leverage technology so that we can boost what we do on a daily basis. And we've known the technology is there. Now we were forced during this last 14 months to really look at it. And businesses have been really able to step back and say, okay, what can we do? What can we do manually versus what do we need to do leveraging technology? And layered on top of all of that is always going to be, how can we get the optimum performance out of it and manage our risk? And Jim at the end, Jim Bruxford, will talk a lot about the management of the risk part. You know, what does that look like? Because everything that we do, there was risk when we were doing it manually, probably more risk. And so people think now when we're talking about technology and the cloud and everything else, how do we manage that cybersecurity? I guarantee you, from a business perspective, the risk was even higher when we were doing those processes manually. And so now we just have to make sure we take care of it on the cybersecurity side. So I think on the next slide, we probably have I want to start off with a question for the audience. So we've put up a polling question and I'd love to see what, where people are at. And I would guess initially when we put up this polling question, I had E for more than one of the above, because truly these all work together, and truly you probably have more than one of these things going on. But I really want to see what's the main driver. What are people really focused on? But I guarantee you it's not just one of them, I think. So I'm just waiting to hear what some of those results are going to come in at.
So Sandy, right now, most of the people are saying we have too many inefficient or manual processes in place. Coming in second is we don't have the right technology and ineffective use of technology. And those are
Perfect.
holding pretty fast. 56% for inefficient processes and 25% for the lack of the technology.
Perfect. Okay, great. That's exactly what, I would have expected some of that, because again, as we've shifted and as we've moved to offsite processes, just because you're not doing it in person doesn't mean you're doing it in the best way. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about. So let's kind of jump into the crux of it. So there's been a unique, the pandemic has caused us to shift our paradigm. So in the last 14, 16 months, there's been a huge change in the way we look at things in everything. And these processes and the things we're going to talk about were there well before the pandemic. We were preaching, we were telling you to do this, we were telling you get leverage technology, do it this way, do it that way. And people just weren't ready. We get all of us get comfortable doing things the way we've always done it. Well, enter pandemic, and we've all had to say, we can't do it that way. So where I've had my own partners saying no, my own clients saying no, we can't do it that way, they've said, I've tried to tape it. You're right, Sandy, has been a comment I've heard many times. They've now had to figure out how can we change it. So the pandemic definitely escalated it and opened up our openness to change the way we're doing things. And especially in the digital transaction side and the bill paying side and how we do it. But as we heard from the survey results, do we have the right tools to do those digital processes? And what does that look like? And again, that risk management side. So those are the things that we're really going to focus on in today's, couple minutes of conversation. And I hope this leads to more conversation down the road. So do you have the resources necessary for that growth, for that next phase? And so, we talked about the people side, and do you have it's not just, can we help with your people? Can we augment your staff? But do you have the right people? Can we train your people? Are your associates able to take on that technical piece, that working with technology and learning that technology? Because it can be challenging for all of us. We've all learned new technology. Before we were on this call, we were talking about Zoom and us all learning how to use Zoom in a different way. And someone needed help on how do we put our do not disturb on so we don't get disturbed during the conference. So we're all learning new technology. So then we look at, what do we have the right technology? Is the right technology in place? Just because we're doing it differently and we're doing it from home maybe, and we're paying bills in a different way, are we using the right technology? Because there's so much out there, and I can speak to every technology that's out there, whether you use bill pay or whether you use a different automated process, or whether you do it through your bank, there's so many technologies. There's QuickBooks Online, and there's Xero, and there's Sage Intacct. I don't want to talk about those technologies. I want to make sure that we understand that every business needs a different technology, and every business needs to understand what their technology needs to make it efficient for them. And then finally, is the process right? When we do things, when we used to pay bills, I'll use pay bills as my main driver. When we used to pay bills in the office, everyone thought, well, the bill comes to the office, so it has to go through the mail. So someone can intercept that mail, but that's where, you might have some security process, but the mail has to come in. Someone has to open it. Someone has to look at it and decide, okay, are we paying this? Who's going to pay it? How does it get paid? Is it an appropriate bill? Then it has to be coded into the accounting system. Then someone has to look at it and sign the check. Then the check has to be stuffed in the mail and sent out. There's a million processes. So some people started to do that remote, but the business owner might be delivering the bag of mail to the office or to the person's home office. I've had associates say, well, I go pick up the mail at the clients and I bring it back to my house, then I process the checks, and then we do that. I said, no, we have to switch to a technology. We have to switch to how can we leverage that? Can the bills get scanned in? Can they get sent directly from the vendor via an email? a secure email that then is looked at securely, and then that bill is automated process. And you need those processes in place to make sure that you have the proper controls, that make sure you have the proper internal controls, and nothing gets paid that's inappropriate. So people think there's risk in doing it in an automated fashion. There's more risk in all those steps I talked about at the beginning, but we just have to make sure that now that we're doing it remotely or we're doing it differently, that we've got the process in place to make it the most efficient and the most secure. So kind of all three of those things come together, and thank you for switching the screen. I was just going to say, though, those three circles all come together because you can't have one without the other. You can't have, there's that intersection. And we say this with everything. When you look at, the Olympics, which is coming up this summer, when you look at the Olympics and all the circles and the intertwining of those circles, and you look at these circles, it's the same thing. Everything has to come together. People work as teams, and we can't do things all by itself. So there's so many opportunities for business as we're changing the way we do things. How do we look at it? So we've got to evaluate, the first thing is evaluating and upgrading your technology stack, making sure that you have the right technology. So, I talked about Raymond, and when we started, we had just moved over to Zoom, but quite frankly, we used Zoom, we used Microsoft, we used several different technologies, and now we're all on the same platform, and it makes it so much more efficient in terms of training, in terms of everything that we do, we're all on the same platform. So you just want to make sure that you evaluate your technology stack and make sure it's appropriate and right for your business. And again, mitigate, migrate from things that are in office, in person, to what can you do cloud-based. And Jim will I know he's going to attack on the cloud-based, what does that look like from the cybersecurity side? What does that look like when you take things to the cloud? There's a lot of conversation on that and making sure that you protect there. And then again, how are we going to be flexible and free up our time? How can we help you, or you help yourself in terms of augmenting your staff? What does that look like? If you automate the processes, it creates a lot of flexibility. So I had a client that is a part owner of a business. The business is on site. It's they run children's classes, recreational type classes. She semi-retired and moved to North Carolina. She can run the back office from North Carolina. But now I have to help her making sure that the process is efficient, that the bills don't come in manually. How can I help her do that? But it goes, if you want to be able to approve bills from Alaska, I would prefer Hawaii, but wherever you want to be able to do some of your work, a lot of people have realized I can go spend, if you're in Michigan, I can go spend more time up north at my cottage up north because I have that ability and my staff has that ability, and everyone can look at it differently. So it's really created a lot of flexibility. But with flexibility comes, okay, we've got to be able to make sure we understand how people are working. We have to understand productivity. So I've had people say to me, well, people are working remotely. How do I know they're getting the job done? Well, there's benchmarks to help us. If you knew how much they got done on a day in the office, it should be comparable or probably more efficient. But really, there's lots of industry benchmarks and what we could expect for, running payroll or running, depositing bills or recording accounts payable or accounts receivable. There are lots of industry benchmarks that we can help you through so that you can understand. And some companies, people have asked me, how do I motivate my employees? Every business is different. I have one client who now has every morning she has a Zoom call with her group, and it might be at 10 a.m. so that it gives them all a chance to kind of do their own thing and then come to the call at 10 a.m. just to kind of say hello, just like you would in the office. You'd meet for coffee at the coffee station or in the break room. She's doing that virtually now just to say hello and good morning to her office staff. Every business is different and every employee is different on what motivates them and what they're going to need to stay engaged. But that is a key and essential point of when you're moving to employees that are working remotely. And then finally, kind of the whole crux of what we're talking about is that when you do all these things, what's the whole point? Because didn't we start this saying, I'm trying to help you improve performance? It's not just improving performance of your associates that are writing the checks. It's improving the performance of your business. And how do you improve the performance of your business? Is to understand the data better, to have the data in real time, because it does no business any good to know their information a month later, 2 weeks after the month ends. You need to know in real time. You need to know how things are going. You need to be able to understand your business. And that's what Tara's going to talk about. When I was thinking about this, and the train has kept running. A lot of businesses have been able to keep their train running through this pandemic. But we want to make sure that train is running efficiently, that it's got the best gas, that it's not stopping if it doesn't need to stop in every town on its way, that it's got the direct route to get there, and that there are nothing holding it up, and that you're not paying too much for the gas. Those are all the things that help that train run efficiently. And that's the same thing with your business. So I know Tara's going to talk quite a bit about, what does that look like? How do we better understand this information that our backroom is giving us and that we need to get better, quicker, and faster? So I hope that was helpful. I talked a lot and fast. Was there any questions that came up, or are we waiting till the end for those?
No questions so far. I've been monitoring as we go. Please
Wonderful.
Feel free to put questions out there and we'll make sure we get to them.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Sandy. Now, Tara's up next. And, Sandy, when you talked about that, it reminds me that there's a phrase that says that data is the new oil. And if you think about America on a historical basis, America ran on oil. That was the transfusion all the way through the economy that kept everything going. And now it's transitioned to data and information. So with that, Tara, can you enlighten us to better information, better results?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I definitely feel that, as Jim mentioned, as Sandy has kind of said as well, that with better information, you make better decisions. I think every individual, you all would say that we always work as hard as we possibly can to make the best decision possible. And I think that's great. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would admit that if we had better information, we certainly may make better decisions. And that's what we're going to talk about, is some of that better information to get those better decisions. Before we dive all the way in, we're gonna jump to a polling question, and just curious on what people really do in reviewing your financial information. So we have some options for you on your screen.
So far, monthly's taking the lead. It's way out there. It's above 60% at this point, with the real-time on demand is coming in around 22%.
Wow, we have a pretty good group here today that's really trying to do things in the time they're supposed to. That's wonderful.
It stayed consistent.
All right, very good. That's exciting. That means that we have a good foundation and we have the ability to keep moving forward. So that's wonderful. And, I think if we really are honest with ourselves, we spend a lot of time looking in the past, and, we're all on Sandy's train and we're going. Well, if we keep looking in the past and we're trying to get a PPP loan, we were trying to get an EIDL, an ERC, and on and on and on. And all of those things, we're looking at the past. We're looking to see how much have our sales decreased. What are we going to do to manage our expenses appropriately in order to take the most advantage as we can of those opportunities? Nothing wrong with that. We absolutely need to do that. However, eventually, our train is going to crash into the station if we don't look forward. We can't always look in the rearview mirror. And I think, moving on, we really want to make sure that we're looking in front of ourselves. What's out there? If you look out the front window instead of looking out the back, there's a whole world in front of you, and there's countless opportunities in order to really make those better decisions. What do you have in place today? What do you need to have in place? What's going to take you to that next step? Really moving forward, making those best decisions possible. We could talk about a 13-week cash flow, a financial model. What are you doing with your cost accounting? How efficient are you in your operations? Do you have any CFO oversight? And we'll talk some more about these, and just think about ways one or all, or at least some of these, can really have a significant impact on your business, and not just getting along, but really thriving and growing. Moving to the 13-week cash flow, some of you may have attended our previous session where Tom Szymanski talked in a lot of detail on the 13-week cash flow. So certainly, if that's something of interest to you, or you are thinking about doing, I certainly would recommend going back. We have the last webinar on our YouTube channel, so certainly check that out. If you have questions, we're always happy to answer those as well. But just to kind of summarize again, the 13-week cash flow it's a very dynamic tool. It's something that you're constantly updating to always have that 13-week model or whatever week makes sense for you. Typically, it's a 13-week. And this is something that's bringing those actuals and forecasts together. So we're kind of bringing what happened and what do we think is going to happen and how do we manage this? How do we make sure that we're making good decisions today so that our cash flow tomorrow is not impacted negatively? We can't do that if we don't have the right tools in front of us. And this is an excellent tool to do that. But if we really step back, if we don't have some of those processes in place that Sandy talked about, how do we even know what's going to happen? How do we know what happened yesterday to even determine what's going to happen tomorrow? So we really have to have that good foundation to keep going. And then to grow from there as a financial model, really talking about this is the big picture. This is talking not just those 13 weeks and just the cash. This is really what are we going to do? How are we going to get there? This is really driving all of your decision making. How are we going to get the sales we think we're going to get? How are we going to cover the costs? What are the costs? A financial model is a tool that we would build. It's a very dynamic model. There's no cookie cutter to this at all. It can be a forecast, a projection, a budget. We can be making decisions. Should we make this product or buy it? Should we add a location? Should we close a location? We're trying to get investors or more financing. How do we get there? What do we do? How do you answer that question? Again, I don't think you can answer that question if you don't have good information. And I would definitely argue as well, if you don't have a foundation as to what you expect results to be, you can almost always convince yourself that the results are correct. It's easy to say, oh yeah, that seems reasonable. Oh yeah, great. You know what? I think that's good. Well, based on what? Just your gut instinct? Maybe you're running the business. You probably have some good knowledge. But at the same time, if you have really good information, you can make really good decisions. Maybe you've heard me say that a time or two here in this presentation. And the key to the model is it helps you determine why. So it's not just, this is what I thought was going to happen, and then this is what happened. It's why did it happen that way? That's where the value really is. It doesn't mean that what you thought was going to happen is wrong. If it's different, it's going to be different. This is a forecast. It's not going to be 100% accurate. But if it's significantly different, then it gives us that ability to really dig into it and say, okay, this isn't what I thought was going to happen. Now, why did it happen that way? And what do I need to do about it? How do I continue moving forward and perhaps change my assumptions or adjust things so that I can continue to make good decisions and I can make sure that the impact is a positive impact and not something that I'm scrambling on because I didn't anticipate that to occur. Another tool that we really want to make sure we have in place is our cost. I would argue all day long, if we do not know our costs, how can you reduce your costs? And I can agree when someone says to me, well, we're making money, everything must be okay. Okay, sure. Do you want to make more money? Or I'll be a little facetious, but what happens if there's a global pandemic? What happens if supply chain is completely interrupted and our costs are driven up, our lead times are driven up? What happens? If I would have said that 2 years ago, everyone would have said, oh yeah, okay, that could happen. But we now all live in a world where we know almost anything can happen and the impacts are there regardless. So let's have better information so when something happens, we can make fast, good decisions. So how do you know what's driving your costs? What's making those costs occur? Do you know what your fixed costs are? Do you know what your variable costs are? When's the last time you looked at your overhead rates? Do you have any type of reporting? Again, looking at what did you think it was going to be and what is it? I would say to any of you, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a service company, go out to the shop floor, or go out to your personnel that are performing services and say to them, you need to reduce costs. They're going to laugh at you and they're going to say, there is no way we can't reduce costs, not happening. But if you know your costs and you say to them, we got to get 10 cents out of this part, or, we got to decrease our costs to create this service by, $100, whatever. They'll say, okay, all right, let's dig into that. Let's see what we can do. It's a very different scenario. But if you don't know your costs, that conversation is pointless because you don't know the impact that it's having. So it's really, really critical to make sure you know your costs. And the next thing is really just being efficient. Sandy talked about this, of just, we got to make sure we have our act together. We got to make sure we're all going in the right direction. And I would say, would anyone notice if there's a task that you're doing, maybe you're an individual that does a lot of the reporting. If you stop printing a report and putting it on the controller's desk, the CFO's desk, would anyone notice? And you might laugh, but they might not. We get so stuck in just doing things the way we've always done them. And I have to do this, and I have to give it to this person, and then she gives it to him, and he gives it to her, and then finally, we're done. Okay, well, did all those, I don't know how many I said, 6, 8 people, did all of those people actually need to touch it? Maybe, but maybe not. So really, we were in survival mode. Everyone was thinking about just, we got to survive. We got to get through. If we can't get through, then none of this matters. But if we can, now we're through, let's take the time. Let's make sure that we're doing things the way that we need to do them. Let's make sure we're taking that step back and just thinking, are we doing this the right way? Are we being as efficient as we can? Are we getting the right information, and are we getting it at the right time? And then finally, just is that kind of oversight. Just making sure that we have someone that's going to just ask the hard questions, just poke holes in what we're doing and say, did we think through this? Okay, we had 8 people touching it. Now we have 4 people touching it. Much better. But do we need 4 people to touch it? Do we still need to go get those bills from the post office? What can we do that's going to make us better? And this might be an internal CFO, it might be an external CFO, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you have that high level oversight. You have someone that's coming in and saying, let's get better information. Let's make better decisions. Let's not be complacent with what we have. Let's think through those assumptions we have in place, always striving to be better and always just staying on the right path and together as a team. And I think, we really can make some really great strides. We have the tools to make good decisions, better decisions, and just keep on moving. So thanks, Jim.
Sarah, thanks for the information. So far we've looked at the processes, a lot of automation. Now we've looked at the data. Let's take now a step forward, look from the spotlight technology, how it enables everything, and then we'll put it all together and wrap it up. Jim, take it away.
Sounds great. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to kick off my little talk also with a poll. So Jim's going to call the horse race here and see which one comes out ahead as they start running around the track. But this is an opportunity for you to just reflect a little bit and to be honest. I know these are somewhat subjective questions as far as what a formal IT assessment is, but we'll leave it up to you and your own self-conscious as to how you feel you do as a business, and and rate yourself honestly, I guess, from that standpoint. I know that can be somewhat challenging at times. So what do we got, Jim?
It's interesting, Jim. The other two, it's been kind of lopsided. Right here, it's definitely a horse race because we got right across the board. Right now, 33% of the people are saying that they do it every year.
Good.
Every couple of years is 18%. The RIT person takes care of it's 27%, and 23% say they don't require it. So you've got
It's
a
just
mixed bag all the way
right.
across the board.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, that's interesting that, I mean, this is why we do the polls, because we just kind of like to get some of this feedback from a lot of different organizations and industries and stuff to kind of give us a feel for where things are at. But we would recommend, obviously, that you do it every year. And if you don't require one, it still would be a good idea to know where you are and where you stand on your technology. So, well, let's go ahead and start looking at I start out with focusing on the majors. And if I could start out by taking a walk down memory lane. I've been in the IT industry. Well, let's just say I created the internet. Can I say that? I don't know. No, probably not. But I've been in the IT industry for roughly 30 years, and I know Zoom does a really nice job of hiding it. I look like I'm 25, and I'll just let you believe that for a little while. But when I started my career, it's very interesting about how business looked back then. This was prior to PCs. I was with an enterprise organization, a large general contractor, a top 50 general contractor in the nation. And we had if you wanted software, you had to develop it yourself. And so there were 6 developers. And when it came to accounting, human resources, like I said, we were a national general contractor building skyscrapers all over the United States. And all of the corporate infrastructure was really housed in a very small 3-story building in Des Moines, Iowa. Well, I look at an organization, if that were scaled today, the IT department would probably fill that building today. And maybe even from an accounting standpoint that way too, with the accounting, the auditors, all of that stuff. So to me, I feel like business today is a lot different than it was 30 years ago. And so we start looking at, as a business leader, what is the best use of your time and your resources? I think growing your business, planning out strategy, looking at how you're organized, dealing with all of your internal processes, those are all important to the success of your organization. Some things you can be the best at, and other things you really can't. And I think it's intuitive to us to look and go, what can I really be good at to move us forward versus what do I have to go find best in class as far as running my business goes. And that's in line with what the theme of what we're talking about today is knowing what you're good at and then getting the help to subsequent and to fill in where you're not, and then get best of class to fill in after that. So to me, that gives your organization a competitive advantage. First identifying that and then playing into that. But then also when you start looking at, well, if I got to look outside my walls for this best in class, what value does it give me? Well, I can speak into the technology side of it and say that you're going to get the experience and the depth that's pretty hard to find in one person or 2 people or 3 people. The kind of skill set that's required to do all of the technology requirements that you have as far as supporting your applications, making sure that you're staying in front of security, making sure that you're getting projects done. I mean, all of that stuff takes time, and it takes different expertise, whether you're talking about servers, workstations, or networking. To get all of that expertise in a few people is very, very challenging, depending upon the size of your organization. The other thing is people like to take vacations. They get sick. They only work 8 hours a day. You got the challenge, if you're around the clock organization about manufacturing, man, that just adds to your staff. Well, outsourcing that provides one source to provide the depth, the experience, as well as around the clock services. So that's something to consider. And then also resources can be flexible. What if you don't really need a full-time person to support that part of your business? What if you only need a few hours a week or an occasional monthly cycle to come in and solve these problems? Now, all of a sudden, looking outside your walls becomes very affordable, and you get the expertise that comes with it. So that's really what we wanted to focus on the majors. So with this day of COVID, it gets really challenging. I know we've been doing this for over a year now, and you'd think that we'd be really, really good at it. But honestly, what I'm seeing in the media and where we're at today is a lot of businesses are just now starting to say, wow, opening the office back up in some cases, or hey, we've made it through with some people in the office. But now they're really starting to take a good hard look of what does it look like to have a remote staff permanently? And I know Facebook and Google here recently released information on they're asking their people to stay home, for the most part. And a lot of other businesses are doing the same thing, going, you know what, we've done it for a year. We're just going to do that. And you'll see the stat there, 75% of US businesses have associates working remotely. So that's significant. Now, what does that mean? Well, we used to have everybody in the office, and from a technology standpoint, you had control over that environment from a security standpoint and what your employees could see, do, and feel from a technology standpoint. Well, now when you push that home into the home office, wow, what does that do to your business? And so I've listed some things here. To an advantage, just a personal experience, we had an employee that really wanted to live in Colorado Springs. He picked up and moved his family to Colorado Springs, and he's just as productive there as he is here. He just has to get up early in the morning and work on the Eastern time zone, and he was willing to do that. So now also when you're looking for talent, we aren't just posting in the state of Michigan going, hey, if you're willing to work on the Eastern time zone, I don't care where you live in the United States. And all of a sudden our talent pool opportunities opened way up. So now that brings a real advantage to the working remote. The challenge that comes with that is, how are you managing their productivity? How do you know whether they're being productive when they're at home? That is a big challenge. We've invested a lot in our tools and our technology to be able to create dashboards and put metrics together to help people see their own performance, but also our management teams to say, okay, yeah, you're achieving your goals, and we're moving forward. But that was a big challenge that we had to overcome. And then I mentioned, real estate. Do you need as much real estate next year as you do today versus what you needed a year ago? That's a real strong prospect there. And I think if you're looking to expand, do you look to expand in real estate, or can people work remote? Those are all really good business decisions to look at going forward. Supporting remote staff. When we pivoted a year ago, we were pretty flexible already as far as employees being able to work remote. But however, a lot of businesses weren't. We helped them walk through that. And one of the things that we really encourage businesses to look at, especially if you've got a workforce that's planning on working remote permanently, is to do a home audit. Go through and make sure they have an adequate workspace that can support their professional work at home. Some people, when we had to pivot, we had some people working at their kitchen table with their family home permanently. That made it very, very challenging for them. And so that's why it's important to know that, A, are they equipped, and do they have space where they could potentially close the door and have some privacy, or be able to conduct a meeting, online without being interrupted, those sorts of things. And then also company issued technology. There's a couple different approaches, and that is, take the technology you have that's company issued, and that's all you're allowed to use from home. Make that connection, keep it secure, and you maintain that control. The other approach is create IT systems so that the data never leaves the office, but yet your employees have remote access from home, but they're accessing the corporate resources through remote technology like remote desktop. And so that way they can use their home computers and such. So just walking through that, making sure they're well equipped. And then establishing good habits. One of the things that we found is that when you have some people in the office, some people at home, what is a good meeting protocol? And we decided that you can't really have people in a conference room with some people dialing in, that shows my age, 30 years of IT, there you go. where people are remote coming in, that when the meeting hangs up, that the people in the conference room continue the meeting. You got to establish protocol that that's not allowed. So where you have a meeting with all people, they're either, if everybody can't be present and in a conference room, then everybody stays in their office or at home and everybody's remote. And that seems to work better from a meeting protocol. And then what are you investing socially to keep your employees engaged? That's been a real challenge in COVID. Hopefully that's opening up now and you have some more options. But being able to do a little social hour via Zoom, it's not quite the same, but those are things to think about as well. So then as we start thinking about remote, we used to, like I said earlier, is that you used to have all of your technology in the office and it was a little bit easier to control. Well, now when it goes out into the wild, security becomes a significant part of how you plan your technology rollout. And you can see that, you know, I think most people have seen how security issues have been compromised here and the impact it's had on supply chains. How many times have you been on Amazon Prime and everything's back ordered? You know, it's happening regularly now. Not all of that is tied to security, but a lot of it, some of it is, you know, and you just got to be aware of what's coming from the work from home, and have you planned to extend your security to the home office from when you're used to having it in the home office. And the next slide. One way that we work with clients to go through that is to lay out this program, that this structure and foundation that we've put together. It's all based on the NIST requirements and recommendations. So this isn't something we just made up off the top of our heads. This is a structure that's recommended through NIST, through CIS. There's a lot of organizations that put these together. But we want to walk you through what it takes to say, okay, when I go to bed at night, I'm going to rest easy when it comes to security. And the first step is on the left there, the governance. You got to be able to understand and know who is in charge of what data in your organization. And then from there, you move into making sure you identify what your important data is. What are your crown jewels that are significant to your organization? And then start putting a strategy together for how you're going to protect that data. And then the next step is obviously implement that strategy, roll that out, make sure your data is being protected. And then from an ongoing standpoint, what are your policies and procedures that you've built to help protect this long term so that you're not going back through and missing things as you roll new things out? It becomes a part of your business as to how you protect your data. And stepping through all of those categories will get you to a point where you say, okay, yes, I feel better now about where I'm at when it comes to security and securing my business. So that's basically what I wanted to walk through. Jim, I'll turn it back over to you for questions and answers.
Great. We'll open it up for questions. I do have a couple questions from the audience so far. If you have more, you're welcome to put them into the open question box or put them down in the panelists will definitely respond to them. Sandy, some of the people are basically saying, you know, based on return on investment, where's the best place to get started from your opinion? Where's that low hanging fruit? If you had one spot to go, where would you start?
In terms of return on investment, I think the biggest thing, if we're talking about the process in the area I talked about, was looking at a bill paying process. That's where it's easy to set up, it's timely, and it will get you really starting to look at doing things digitally. And it's really so secure. You know, it's like, you know, your checks have your banking information and your routing information. When you pay through a bill paying service, it's their routing information, and your information is protected.
Thank you, Sandy. We have a question. Is the 13-week cash flow spreadsheet something that's available from Raymond, and how could they get it?
We certainly are willing to help you with the 13-week cash flow. We don't have a spreadsheet template that we necessarily just distribute out, but it is something that we develop internally. Like I mentioned before, it's not something that's a cookie cutter type thing. So it's something that we actually do build for each client based on their specific needs. So we'd be happy to help you build one if that's something that's of interest to you.
So Tara, it sounds like when you say it's not a cookie cutter, it really, there's too many dependencies to be able to come up with a standard format and flip it out to someone.
Exactly. Yes. There's so many different things that can go into the 13-week model. We have, different long-term plans that might be falling within those weeks. There are certainly different receivable cycles, payable cycles, loans, all those different things that we certainly have to think about, lead times on invoicing, on and on. So it's really difficult to have just a standard plug in some numbers and it would go. That would be great, but not near as valuable.
Gotcha. Okay. Another question that came up from the group too is they're basically saying you had a lot of good suggestions of where the information that's important. If they don't have some of it, what would be the most important thing that they could do? Of all the suggestions, where would they start first?
Well, I would keep coming back to, they've got to look at their staff and make sure that their staff can adjust. So I think that's the first thing, is looking at your team, making sure you have the right team in place. Because if you have people that can't necessarily adjust well to doing things through technology or doing things remotely, then you've got to start over, or you've got to augment that staff. So I think that's the first place you look at, is who's on your team.
Thank you, Sandy. Tara, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, any one of the different tools that I talked about can be valuable depending on what industry you're in, what your biggest challenges are, and what you're really facing. If you're having a lot of pressure to, maybe even decrease your selling price, or you're having difficulty coming up with quotes or meeting quotes, then your costing can be extremely important. For others, even though it's important, maybe it's not the most important thing right now, because as I mentioned, you're doing okay, or you're covering your costs. Not that it's not important, but it's not the number one thing. So some of it really depends on where you're at in the cycle. But I think regardless, it's really important to have a plan. To have, I talked about what do you expect to happen versus what actually happened. It's really critical to have that foundational, what do we expect, so we can compare it to what happened and we can talk about why. So if that's a full financial model, or if that's, maybe just kind of a business plan with some numbers to it, wherever we can get a start, that's the best thing, is to have that good expectation foundation.
Thank you. One more question for you, Tara. Is right here. It says, my company does not do costing well. I'm the CFO of the company, and costing's my kryptonite. Not even sure where to start. Can you assist in any suggestions?
I can tell you that is very common. And I don't want to say that it's common to make you feel better, I guess, that it's okay, but it is okay. It's okay that you don't know, because there's people out there that do know. There's people like myself and others on our Raymond team that have that expertise. And costing is just one of those things that's kind of funny. It's complicated. It's a really difficult thing to really do well. And no one can know everything. I certainly don't know what Jim knows. I can tell you that. Either Jim, for that matter, but certainly on the IT side, that is not my expertise. I cannot know that. And just because you're a CFO does not mean that you know how to do costing. Completely fine that you don't, and give you a lot of credit that you admit that you don't. And it's certainly something that we can help with.
Thank you, Tara. Jim, they want to know where you get your vitamins from, since you look so young. I'm kidding. Hey, Jim, a couple questions is, what's the number one threat, and what should they do about it from a security perspective?
Yeah, I think that we get that question a lot. I think the key thing here is ransomware is very, very rampant right now. And the most effective, cost-effective thing you can do is end user training. That's the first thing you can do, because that's the weakest point in your whole organization, is your staff, basically. As the better you educate them, the better knowledgeable they are about what to look for, the better you can defend yourself against the ransomware. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any additional questions or comments? I think at this point in time, we've got all those. So let's kind of put the wraps on this. So we started off today saying, hey, We're coming back in. It's a chance to be resilient and repeat. This is our chance potentially to fix things that may have been broken prior to getting started. Sandy took the time and talked about the processes, how you can automate and change things up and kind of focus there. Tara focused in on the data, what types of things with the 13-week cash flow and the cost accounting and looking at it and oversight and all those different aspects. And then Jim wrapped it up with basically saying, from a technology perspective, working in the remote environment, what are the different challenges that you got, as well as from a security perspective, because it is top of mind for everybody. How do we make sure that we're secure? So with that, thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. June 15th, mark your calendars with the Empower series. We have a financial strategy, it's a personal financial strategy webinar that'll be set up for you. And with that, we'll call it a day. And thank you for joining us for the Empower series. Take care, everyone.